Now boarding all passengers to the bassist.net.
Man, yeah, this is the Bassist podcast. Have you been on a podcast before?
Yeah, somewhere along the line.
Now this is an interesting one because actually this is the first time that we're doing a video podcast. Normally this is just audio only, but since we're in this really awesome music box, that's the name of this room, John? Yeah, sweet. So since we're in the music box, they already got cameras, so let's just roll with it and see how it goes, man.
Absolutely,
So your number one video podcast for
Fantastic.
the Bassist. Yeah, man. So what you been up to, man? What's going on? You came in, you said a couple days ago, right?
Yeah, we flew in on Sunday. I did a master class at the Musicians Institute in Hollywood on Tuesday.
Oh, right. Nice. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's cool. I mean, what were you covering? Was it improv? Was it?
Yeah, it was like improv.
That's
cool.
cool.
Good little crowd of guys. It's a busy week because it's NAMM and everything. There's a lot of people going up there. But yeah, it was good. Great group and very receptive. It's a great facility.
It really is. You know what? I was there back in December. I was rehearsing with an artist for a couple of shows we did around Christmas time. And yeah, that place is it's historic. You can tell like not much has changed over the years.
That's right.
It's probably the same carpet on the floor. It's probably, a lot of this, everything you can just tell like, wow, there's some history in this building, And then obviously a lot of great players, a lot of great faculty,
Yeah. No, it's great. And Maurice Verloop, who runs the program up there, top-notch guy. Really looks after you. And they've got a good thing going on there. And it's great to see that there's still some good music schools around, because everything's kind of dying, And it's either dying on the idea that it's hard to stay in business, because, a lot of people are not going to these places as much as they used to in the old days. And then, also from the standpoint that they're actually teaching some decent stuff, because there's a lot of schools now that are revolving around making it so dumbed down that the students actually leave with nothing. I mean, this is a historic time for that. There's people with music degrees that do not know what a minor second is.
I can't tell you how many musicians that I've worked with, and I use that term loosely because they went to music school, they got a degree, and it's like, okay, cool. And then I play with them, like, whoa. How did they let you graduate? I'm not trying to offend you, but how did you get that paper? How did you were there for 4 years, and that's all you need to do now?
Yeah.
It's insane.
But a lot of schools are trying to go down that road of not allowing the teachers to fail their students.
Yes.
And I think that's a huge mistake, because we only learn and progress and evolve by discovering our own failures.
Oh, exactly. Yeah, definitely.
And if you go back in history to Abe Lincoln, right up to present day for any big business guy, to all the great musicians of our time, they learned and evolved through failure.
Sure. Yeah,
so,
of course.
The idea that a teacher has his hands tied, and then there's a lot of guys that buy into that who are the teachers because it's a vicious circle. They need the work.
Yeah.
They need the work to teach, so they go along with it, walking on eggshells, thinking, But to me, the student doesn't win. The only person that wins is the guy who's teaching or the school who's delivering that sort of content.
Whoever's collecting the paycheck,
Do you see what I mean?
Right,
so that's where
doing the student a disservice,
with my I've kind of always been my reputation from the 1980s to the present has always been that I'm a bit of a hard ass. I like to describe myself as kind of a friendly drill sergeant.
I've not met one of those before.
Yeah, so
how does that work?
I do sort of put my students through the paces, but that's why people actually come to me, and I always tell these guys, look, you're the one who wants to succeed here, so you've got to go through this ring of fire because everyone else has, and it's a lot of just sort of incorrect doctrine that is being fed through the internet and all sorts of other places that, you don't need this, or you don't, everything should be fun and it should be like this, or, and no one really talks about the idea that people who get good have spent an enormous amount of time,
blood, sweat, and
and
tears.
effort.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's almost a dirty word to talk about it. So I used to, I had a marketing mentor for a while, a guy called Dan Kennedy, old school. He was the guy who wrote the copy letter for the Tony Robbins Unlimited Power infomercial that made Tony
seriously?
Robbins. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh, dang.
And I mean, he's the kind of guy that would get like, 60 grand to write a copy letter for someone. Old school, renowned guys, work for so many big companies. And he said to me, Joe, what you got to do is you got to look at what everyone else is doing and do the complete opposite. And the thing is that I was doing that anyway, but it kind of confirmed that for me, And so that's my niche. My niche is quality. You got to work. If you're going to come and do my stuff, it's like you will not progress without the struggle. So, the enjoyment is in the struggle, and then that's the final outcome. Because really, with this stuff, you know what I'm talking about. Anyone who's played for a while and played in the real world knows this, is that there is no finish line.
Right.
There is no finish. Look at Wayne Shorter. And I got to say this, man. The other day I saw this thing on Facebook. It was a Wayne Shorter interview. And Wayne said the problem with players today, and he's talking about guys who are pro and on a very high level in the jazz scene. He said the problem with players today is that they're just trying to amaze people. And we see a lot of that on YouTube, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And they're just really concerned with instrumental prowess. But he said what they're missing these days is composing.
Sure.
Because he said, you got to bleed a little when you compose. And I love that, so
bleed a little,
that's the thing, it's like, and this is the thing when people want to learn to improvise, is that because a lot of guys come to me because they can't play over changes. Most of the guys who come to me, I don't teach a lot of beginners, although I'm running a beginner's course, and that's been, very successful. But as a one-to-one thing, I don't get many beginners. Mostly it's intermediate guys that have done it for a while, and they want to know how to play over changes. They don't really understand that concept. So the thing is what I tell them is that you have to follow in the footsteps of the masters. John Coltrane, when he wrote Giant Steps, practiced that for 3 or 4 years before he unleashed it on anyone.
Yeah.
Okay, and that's documented, and I know that for a fact. And he would write chorus after chorus after chorus. Now, if you transcribe that solo, you will note that there's lots of repetitive stuff in there. It's not just like 12 choruses of different ideas. He's using, he's mixing and matching, but the thing about that is that that's how he learned that. Jaco, when he put out the first album, and also all those, like on Heavy Weather, the Havana solo, and the solo on Donna Lee on his first album,
Beautiful.
It Used to Be a Cha-Cha, those were composed solos.
Yep.
And that's a fact. I knew that back when I was at Berkeley, in 1975. But so what people do is, I guess Jaco can't play over changes. No, knucklehead. And he was he reading the solo from It Used to Be a Cha-Cha on the date? No, he's been practicing that stuff for 6 or 7 years. It's ingrained, but it had to be perfect.
Yeah.
That album had to be perfect.
And it was. Absolutely, yeah.
So it's writing, it's composing. Because if you're writing solos, then you're composing. And what is improvisation? It's accelerated composition.
Yeah, Bela Fleck had a cool way of saying that, how improv and composition are the same thing. It's just one is the other in slow motion, and then vice versa in fast motion. Composition is improv. You're just taking your time. And improv is composition. You're just doing it really fast. And obviously the more chops you have and the more you work on either of those, well, the quicker and the more natural it's going to be able to come to you. And I've always looked at myself not as a great improviser because I'm a classical musician. My degree is in classical music. And when I was a kid, I preferred playing something rather than, I mean, playing something that was written versus like coming up with my own thing. So
Yeah.
I've always struggled with improvisation. In the sense of like, if someone like put a gun to my head, say something funny, like I don't know, let me think of a joke. Hold on, give me a second. Like I like coming up on the spot. Like I've just never done very well. And it's like, okay, so I just kind of lean towards that direction. So in my compositions, I mean, that's what I do. I spend weeks, not years, but weeks pouring over the solo and trying. I could go here. Let's try this note instead. What if we did this rhythmic figure? Like, let's like mix and match. Let's make the thing happen. And when you put it all together, I mean, like Donna Lee, it sounds improvised. It sounds like you're doing it. But I mean, I took a lot longer to to put together and do it that way. But I say for me, that's just how my brain's wired. I have a hard time just like in the moment. Even though I'm doing it right now, I'm speaking and I'm just making these words up. So obviously, like we all have that ability to improvise. But I've always felt that I'm a much better composer than an improviser. But even though I know like technically it's the same thing, so why am I struggling with one and not the other? And I feel like a lot of players have that same struggle.
Yeah, I think a lot of it has to do with I often say that when I teach a master classes, what do people consider how music is defined? Like, I'd say, to you, what is the definition of music? And people say all sorts of very bizarre things.
Yeah.
Like, groove, feel, dynamics, even slapping or palm muting or playing finger funk or these kind of things. But very few people say melody, rhythm, and harmony.
The three pillars of music.
That is music right there. Yeah. So once I get that out of them or coax that out of them, I'll say, okay, now you want to be a musician. Okay, how are you going to do it? Let me see. I guess I'll have to practice. Okay. What else? And they'll go through a list of things as well. And I'll say, well, you've missed one vital point. What instrument are you going to channel that through? Okay. You want to be a musician, you have to choose an instrument. You have to say, I want to play piano. I just like, you get inspired by something. You want to play bass, and that was what largely happened to me to go to play bass was hearing Vulcan Worlds by Stanley on Where Have I Known You Before?
For me, it was School Days.
Yeah,
that's one of my favorite things to ask bass players is like, why bass? What's because there's something about it that pulls us to it. The average person, it's drums or guitar, like especially like kids, if they were going to try out an instrument, it's going to be drums or it's going to be guitar. But you chose bass. Why is that? I don't want to say there's something wrong with you, but you're different. You're different than all the other kids. Yeah. So why the bass guitar? For me, it was School Days. I heard that song. My dad put it. He had the School Days record. They were these things called vinyl, and you would put them in a turntable. Bad joke. And so like he put it on. I was just like, I stopped what I was doing. I was like, what the hell is that? Oh, rewind it. It doesn't work that way. I'll just drop the needle. And I listened to that song over and over and over and over and over again. And then Vulcan Worlds and all the Return to Forever stuff. I fell in love with Stanley Clarke. That's what did it
Stanley.
For me.
That's why I started. So and then I say to people, okay, you've chosen the bass guitar. So, now what are you going to do? And a lot of people are really lost for a formula. Well, to me, the first part of the formula is technique. And I don't mean technique in the way a lot of people define that, because technique to a lot of people is playing fast, or it's like, playing some unrelated spider exercise. It has nothing to do with music. But I'm talking about understanding the instrument. And man, I have taught, like in the UK, I've taught everybody from the early 80s.
Now, some of your biggest students, I was looking this up the other day, some of your earliest students, correct me if I'm wrong, would be Pino Palladino, Paul Turner from Jamiroquai. Yes. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Jamiroquai is like one of my favorite bands of all time. That blew me away. And obviously Pino is everybody's favorite bass player. So that's incredible. The both of those guys, like you were talking a second ago about, like, I put my students through the ringer. So what's that ringer look like? How do I get through it too?
Yeah. Well, I mean, Pino, this is an interesting story about Pino. And everyone asks me, those MI guys, can you tell another story about Pino? And he's so popular. He's a beautiful guy, Libra. He's a wonderful person. He was my first student.
Seriously?
Isn't that wild?
Wow.
You know, and of course no one knew.
And he didn't screw him up. Good job.
Yeah, no one knew who he was. Well, no, because you know he was tough. You know, he's a tough guy. You know, he's a man's man, and you know he's accountable. And these are all things now that, you know, we live in a really soft society. Everyone's, you know, offended by anything that anyone says.
Outrage culture.
No one wants to do any work. You know, if I say to people like, they'll go, how much do I have to practice? I said, well, shoot for 10 hours a week. Whoa, I don't want to be like Hadrian Farode. Hey, listen, let's get something straight here. If you want to be like Hadrian Farode, to practicing 10 hours a week, no
work.
way. Do you know what I'm saying? Oh, really?
Yeah,
you know what I mean? Yeah. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So let's forget about that right now. And let's just start at square one. So Pino was like, he was already self-sufficient in the sense that he knew what he wanted. And he had just really got his first professional gig, which was with Gary Newman. He played on a great album called I Assassin. And it was all fretless back then. He had a Music Man fretless.
Right, yeah. It's
And
very
he
known
slapped
for it.
on it and did all sorts of things. And so Pino, I put an ad and, you know, I arrive in London and I'm working. And I thought, you know, I could make some money teaching here, you know. So I put an ad in the paper and Pino was the first guy. And he came over and he said, yeah, I got this gig with Gary Newman and I want to keep it. So I kind of figured now's the time to understand more about music. So I said, okay, well, can you play me something? And he said, yeah, I'll play this Anthony Jackson line off of this tune called Fantasia from Funk in a Mason Jar.
Yep,
You know that track?
Yep.
It's a rare Anthony track because it's one of the only ones he's actually taken a solo on. And so I said, well, hey, I got that record, again, on the turntable.
Yeah.
And, you know, so, because, you know, this is like 1981 or something. And anyway, so he plays along. He plays with the track, and he nails it. You know, he plays it note for note. You know, and it's happening. So I said, "Well, what the hell are you doing here, man? Like, you know, what do you need from me? You know, it sounds great." And he said, "Listen, what I just played you, I don't understand how to use that on other things." So what I want to be able to do is understand what I'm playing and taking off of records so I can plug these ideas conceptually into the things that I do for my own original stuff. And I thought, see, that's people often, when you are dealing with someone who maybe is been given a label as a musical genius, they often look at the very advanced things that they know as the reason, but it's the foundation that's the reason. Like, for instance, I always say the genius in Jocko was when he bought a bass and his dad said, I'm going on the road and you got to learn all the notes on your fretboard in 9 weeks and I'm going to test you when I get back, is that he did that. Mm-hmm. And he knew all the notes on his fretboard. That's his genius. Yeah. People are missing that. They're going, oh, no, he's like harmonics, his improvisation. No, it's the foundation. Yep. And for Pino to say that to me at that particular time in his career is very mature. So I said, well, okay, you need to know about harmony. You know, you need to understand, you know, chord changes and stuff. So that's what we did. And he was a great student. I never had to yell at him at all. You know, he was just like, he was just the guy, you know, that sort of progressed, you know, all the real.
You got more angry as time went on.
Yeah. all the real top guys. But, you know, and then, you know, he was very busy. He studied with me on and off, probably for about 1.5 years. And he'd go on the road. He'd always come and book a lesson. He'd always come and see me play gigs and stuff. And then, of course, he did that Paul Young thing. A lot of people don't know that Wherever I Lay My Hat, it was an album called No Parlay, CBS put it out, was shelved for a whole year. So when he was studying with me, he was with Gary and he was recording that Paul Young album. And he said, yeah, they don't know what to do with it. You know, they've tested some singles and they're not getting much feedback on it. So they shelved it. And then 1 year later, that hit #1. And he told me when that hit #1, he was booked solid in the studios for 2 years.
Wow. I believe it.
Yeah, and he worked with everybody, you know.
Yes.
So, So, and it was kind of funny because when he quit Gary Newman's band, I got the gig afterwards. And it was also kind of funny because if anyone's read Gary Newman's book, Gary actually said in his book that Pino recommended me for that gig. It's totally incorrect. Okay. Pino would have never, and in fact, I saw Pino, like I got that gig and then I saw Pino about 6 months later and he said, "Hey, I heard you doing Gary's gig." And he said, "Yeah, man, I would have never recommended you for that. I wouldn't have insulted you, by doing that." But it was Nick Smith, who was the engineer for Gary. I was doing a lot of studio work at Gary's studio called Rock City, and for various other projects. And Nick Smith recommended me, who was the engineer, and said, "Hey, get Joe Hubbard because he taught Pino, and so Gary had me come in and that was kind of cool. But yeah, Pino, eventually what was funny was that, he's like slowly becoming, one of the best renowned international session guys, playing on Don Henley's record and all these different things. And he's still booking a lesson with me. So he comes over one day, he books a lesson, and we watched the whole Jocko video. And I said to him, "You know what? I think maybe you're feeling a little bit obligated to come here when you got the time." And I said, "Look, you can come here anytime you want. Just give me a call and come and hang." Nice. We're not really doing much, and he's becoming this huge guy.
Yeah.
But no, he's great. He's a great guy.
I've heard from a few friends that have done sessions with him that he's just one of the sweetest dudes in the world.
He's really a cool guy. Yeah,
he's on my list of people to get on this podcast. So
yeah, well, good luck. He's a hard guy. He's a hard guy to pin down.
Yeah, definitely true.
He's a hard guy to pin down. But so and all those guys like Paul Turner, Mike Mondazier, who is a guy in the UK who's played with Jeff Beck. He's played with John McLaughlin. His brother, Mark, played drums with John McLaughlin for years. And he studied with me loads. Paul Jackson, not the Herbie's Paul Jackson, but Paul Jackson from the 80s band Tapao.
Oh, really?
Studied with me. Nick Beggs,
Wow.
Studied with me. Yeah, I have to, sometimes I got to kind of look at I've got a list,
You got
somewhere.
a list of who's.
Yeah, I've got a list
That's
somewhere to kind of
impressive.
remember how many people.
That's impressive, man.
But the thing is that I've also, taught hundreds and hundreds of other people who, weren't as, didn't have as much of a name. And one of the common denominators of most of my students when they came to me is they didn't know the notes on the fretboard, whether they were a pro or not. So that to me is concerning because how would you be able to play piano if you didn't know the notes? I've never, ever met a keyboard player other than some guys that were in a few 80s bands that kind of did that.
Yeah.
But those guys never got hired to do anything else. So everyone who was actually hired on the scene in London were accomplished musicians. And also I tell my students, who's always the MD in a band? It's a keyboard player or a guitar player, normally. Sometimes a bass player. I know you do that.
Yes, yeah, I do. Bass players make great music directors because we're used to listening. Our parts usually aren't that difficult, so we spend a lot of time listening to everyone else and gluing the whole thing together.
But you got to know about music, right?
Of course, yeah, definitely.
You have to. If you don't understand the notes in a chord or if you can't hear it. See, that's the other thing, too, is there's so many people these days and they can't hear anything. And it's my belief that part of that is that people compartmentalize ear training from everything else that they do. They say, "Oh, I need that ear training app." Now, I'm not saying the app won't help you, to do that, but the real deal is
connecting it to the instrument.
Yeah, but all ear training happens when you practice.
Yes.
The problem with most people when they practice is they switch their minds off. Because they
switch their ears off and they just go to robot mode.
They just want to go through and wiggle their fingers.
Yeah.
So they play by pattern. They don't know the notes. They don't know the relationship of notes. So, for instance, if I teach someone an arpeggio, they have to learn it in all the positions on the bass. They have to then understand the notes, the individual notes. So I make them say the notes out loud when they play them, and also they have to know the note function with what they're playing. So if it's a root, excuse me, it's a root, a flat 3, 5, flat 7, or whatever. It's a minor 7 chord. And then they have to learn all their chords and do that. And of course, people will say to me, well, I can play it, but I can't play it if I have to name the notes. Well, then you can't play it. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Because it's like you have to learn that. You have to understand what's going on with that. And there's a huge, like when people solo, for instance, over changes, one of the biggest things, and it never gets talked about because I don't know why it never gets talked about. I've never heard anyone on the internet talk about this, and very few people talk about it who are bass instructors. But the key when you're solo or play bass lines, and also that, for me, all of that is the same thing. As bass players, we're asked to do 2 things only. We play accompanying bass lines, so we comp in the same way a guitar player comps. You know what I mean? And this gets skewed with terminology. That people, well, is that a groove? Or well, what is a groove? Is a groove a funk groove? Is it an R&B groove? Well, what about a walking bass line? Does that not groove? Any accompanying bass line has got a groove. Anyway, anything you play has to groove. So the idea is you have to play accompanying bass lines, and you occasionally were asked to take a solo. Okay, and it can be on anything. I did a tour with a big artist in the UK. She was big back in the 70s and the 80s, called Elkie Brooks. And it was interesting because Pino was offered that gig, and he didn't want it. He was doing some other stuff, but really? he had said to me, he had said to the manager of Elkie's, he said, "Look, I know a great guy. Call him. He might be able to do it. Joe Hubbard. Don't insult him by auditioning him. Just hire him."
Give him the
and that's
gig.
the only time that's ever happened to me. They rang me up, and it was really good money, and it was quite a big tour. So
I'm gonna try saying that. Don't insult him by asking him to audition.
Yeah,
that just made it into my vocabulary.
yeah. Don't even, come on. You just hire this guy. And so they said, if you're good enough for Pino Pallado, you're good enough for us. So, so I did it. So we did, and this was a pop gig. It was almost kind of like a variety pop gig, and it was kind of her last stand with a major label, but it was quite a big tour, and a big deal. And she actually, Melissa McCarthy, "Don't Cry Out Loud." That was an old 70s hit. I think it was Melissa, a Manchester. Maybe I've got the name wrong. It was, I can't think of the American artist, but Elkie, that was a huge #1 hit in the States. It was Melissa somebody who sang that tune. And then they didn't think she would fly in the UK market, so Elkie did it, and it went to #1. So it was that sort of kind of Nielsen songs and those kind of things. So it was a very pop gig. But she had done a jazz album, and she wanted to do Ain't Misbehaving on the gig. And so, she had said to the guitar player, who's this guy who had come from this rock band called Nazareth, nice. and so he goes like, okay, I can't play over these changes, like, maybe the keyboard player can do it. So keyboard player was like, he couldn't solo. So he said, he said, "Oh, I'll come up with an idea." And he played the melody, with a chorus sound, with a choral, like a choir sound. You know what I mean? So then she said, "Okay, we'll keep that, but we still need something." And I just kept my mouth shut, because on a pop gig, you sometimes kind of have to rein in your skills. Yeah. You know what I mean? You know what that's about. So, definitely. So I said, I didn't say anything, but the guitar player, Zal, said, "Hey, okay, Joe will play a bit of jazz. Okay, you take a solo." So, we were doing 7,000-seater venues, and there was a live BBC deal on that too. And I played like one chorus of solo on that tune. And by the end of the tour, I was thinking I was getting paid by the note. Do you know what I mean? It was just like double.
There you go. Throw them all in there.
It was all over there. So you never know. You know what I mean? You never know. And that was and she really dug that. So
nice.
so that's that type of thing. But if you're going to play jazz and stuff. But I say that accompanying bass lines and occasional solos. So when you're soloing or playing bass lines over changes, and I'm not just talking about some repetitive riff, it's like the idea is that where your ears have taken you on your fretboard, when the chord changes, right there, you have to be able to make that change.
Yeah.
And that's what no one can do. That's the missing link. What happens is that people are soloing like C major 7, C major 7, C major 7, C major 7. Oh, it went to E flat major 7. Oh, shit.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, there's a break.
Up a minor third.
Uh-huh.
So the idea is that it's they can only remember for what position they're actually in from where the root, where they're referencing the root. So they don't understand that where they are, in fact, in every single position on the fretboard, you've got all 12 chords of whatever you're playing, and it's all mixed. I mean, you can play. A great story is that when I went to my first year in Berkeley was 1975, and Pat Metheny was a teacher there. Up until that point, he was still kind of floating around.
Yeah.
And friends of mine had studied with him, and they would go into his office and think that they're going to like show Pat, like, hey, man, I can really play. So Pat would go like, what tune do you know? Well, okay, let's play All the Things You Are. Okay, great. So you get set up, and just before Pat would count it off, he'd say, okay, I want you to play the whole thing in open position. The whole tune in open position.
Nice.
So they'd go, oh, okay. So Pat would comp, play a few choruses, and then Pat would say, okay, let me play now. And he'd play like 12 choruses in the open position that were just like amazing. Now, students often say, oh, I get it. The moral of the story is that you play everything in position. No, that's not what's going on. That's a training methodology. And training methodologies are so important when you're learning to play, because what people do is they just play a bunch of arpeggios and scales, and then they go from A to Z. There's nothing in between.
Yeah.
But there has to be a progressive training methodology to get you there. Do you see what I mean?
Right,
So the idea is that the understanding of that is, when I teach people to improvise, they have to do that in every position and make all the changes, no matter how painstaking it actually is. And it's, I do it in a way where I call it slow improvisation, where there's no time, there's no click, there's no drum machine. It's them playing it very slowly. It's very hard to do, actually. Because,
it is. Yeah, you're right.
Because it bores people, in their development stages, and they think, oh, I want it to sound, more like what I'm hearing on the record. Well, it will, but you've got to get familiar with the stuff. And the other thing is, you got to really know it. It's like I'm doing a gig here on Saturday night. We had a rehearsal yesterday, and we're doing a bunch of my tunes, but a few covers, and we're doing this tune, Actual Proof. Our drummer Dave Anderson, he has a record, and he recorded that tune, which is a Herbie Hancock tune, which is really cool. I'm sure you know it. But what's interesting about that tune is that you really have to know that tune to play it.
There's no faking it.
Yeah, you have to know it, right?
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? So what people do is they say, hey, I'm working on some jazz and I'm working on some tunes. What can I do to kind of make it better? And maybe I could show you some stuff I'm doing. Okay, what are you working on? Oh, All the Things You Are. Okay, can you play me something? Okay, hang on 1 minute. Up comes the real book. Okay, that's the first thing, man.
Yep.
You don't know the tune. Mm-hmm. Oh, well, no, you got to memorize those changes.
Absolutely.
You got to know what that is about.
Yeah, with any of the ensembles that I play with, unless it's a sight reading gig or like a 2-hour wedding or whatever the thing is, no music stands on stage. Everything's up
Yeah.
here. If it's not up here, you're not ready to perform it.
Yeah. I mean, the reading's a great skill too. Don't get me wrong. I mean, you have to have that. But again, here's a concept about reading that no one talks about, is that reading is often prescribed by teachers. Is like, okay, you want to get your sight reading together, then you got to do 2 hours of reading per day, and you got to get 50 books, and then and by the end of like this year, you got to go through all 50 of those books. Well, that would be tantamount if I wanted to learn Japanese.
Sure.
And the teacher said to me, you have to get 50 books in Japanese.
Yeah.
And every day I put that Japanese book on my music stand and I tried to read a sentence. It's insane. How can anyone learn to read like that? And here's the deal. I don't care how much reading skill you have. If the content that's written is unfamiliar to you, like, in other words, like, you know how most guys who read a little bit and they can maybe function quite well under certain circumstances, can easily read, like, you know, a bossa nova line or you know, if it was a cover of Simply the Best or something, anything that's straight up and down,
or even like Bach cello suites. I feel like that's one of the worst things with sight read, because it's so predictable.
Yeah,
you could just kind of guess where the next measure is going to take.
You know what I mean. So the idea is that it's but you throw Donna Lee in front of them, and then they can't cut it at all, you know. And I mean, there are some technical issues usually with that as well, but even at a slow tempo, they couldn't read it. And the reason is because they do not understand the content that is combining the chromaticism, the scales, and the chord tones together. Because
that's exactly why I struggled with that tune. When I was first learning it, I had a Jocko transcription, and I was, I don't know, 17 years old. I had no idea that was a jazz standard. I just thought it was just on the Jocko play because I heard it on his first record. I was like, I'm gonna learn how to play that, and it took me forever to learn it, and I never had it memorized because, like, it was just a bunch of abstract, but like, what the hell is that? Like, it doesn't make any sense. And then I was in a practice room. This is in college, by the way, and a bass player buddy of mine walks by and goes, "Oh, you're working on Charlie Parker? Who originally did it?" Charlie Parker. He said, "Oh, you're looking at Charlie Parker too?" And I was like, "I thought this was a Jocko song." He goes, "Nah, dude." He opens up his rule book and he starts comping the changes of it, and I hear A flat, bum, I'm like, "Oh my God, it makes sense now. Like, I get it." All of a sudden, everything connected, and it was like, immediately I had it memorized because now all these notes had chords, and you could hear the 2-5-1. You could hear where things were going. It was like, why didn't I just do this from the beginning? Like, why did no one tell me, like, oh yeah, this is a jazz standard, and here's how you should do it. Start here and then go that way. That was just, I just bought a Jocko transcription book, and now away I went. Like, I had no idea what I was doing, and I spent a lot of hours, just working in the dark, basically.
Yeah, I mean, it really is like that. You know, I mean, if you don't understand intervallic things and you get an intervallic thing, you won't be able to play it. Yeah. So even if you can read, but I do feel reading's like super important, as a whole thing. Definitely. When I studied with Charlie Banakis, I mean, his system was so involved, and to this day I continue with his top guy Gary Dial, who teaches continues to teach Charlie's syllabus. Charlie had thousands of lessons. Yeah. So, but to just get through his chromaticism thing, it took me about a year.
Jeez.
I mean, I was considered at the time when I started with Charlie to be one of the more first call guys in London. So, I realized, like, yeah, man, I don't know anything. Like Charlie.
And you know what? I think that's actually, I just got the go ahead. We've actually got to wrap it up. But I think that's an excellent place to stop, because I kind of feel like I always come back to that. Like, I really don't know anything. I'm still trying to get there. I'm still, it's basically still an open slate for me. Even though I've been doing this for 25, 30 years, there's still so much more to go, and that's kind of the coolest part. I think that's why music appeals to me, because it's like a game of Pac-Man. There's just another level and then another level And I love, there's no game over.
Yeah,
You
no
just keep
finish
going.
line.
Yeah, exactly.
You
Isn't
know?
that what you said in the beginning?
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, I got
beautiful,
that
man.
from a popular endurance athlete, David Goggins.
Yes.
Okay.
Oh my
if,
God.
If you haven't got his book, you got to get it. Can't Hurt
I haven't
Me.
read it yet, but
David
yes.
Goggins.
Yeah, he's
amazing.
one of my favorite humans.
Amazing.
Dear Lord.
He has the accountability mirror thing that
He
talks about.
holds he's the chin up champion. He's done.
Yeah.
He holds a world record.
Well, I don't know if I think it might have been broken since him, but he did break it.
Yeah.
I think it was in 2016 or something.
Yeah, he's unreal. Yeah, definitely.
He's insane. Ex-Navy SEAL.
Yeah.
You know, yeah.
Well, dude, Joe, if people want to get in touch with you, how do they do it? Where are you at?
JoeHubbardBass.com.
Okay, I mean, do you do Facebook?
I do Facebook, Joe Hubbard Bass, just, Instagram, Facebook.
And you have a YouTube channel as well, right?
Yeah, YouTube channel. Usually have new content up there every week,
Awesome.
So,
Cool,
yeah.
man. Well, dude, thank you so much for doing this, man. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me,
It's an
Jamie.
honor, man.
Cheers.
Watch your step, everybody.
Thank you for choosing thebassist.net. And don't forget to watch your step.